What do you do with a rumor that won't go away? In early 2001, whispers about Justin Timberlake's future kept circulating. They were unconfirmed, easy to dismiss. But as the year unfolded, his visibility kept rising. And by December, at least one person outside of NSYNC knew something the public didn't. If you want the full picture, join me for today's episode, Turning the Page. One band, 5 voices, and today it's all about Justin Timberlake. The confident one, the teen heartthrob, and the one whose year brought him increasingly into his own spotlight. This was the year when his visibility changed. Not overnight, but unmistakably and in ways the public could see. And looking back, you can see the earliest signs of a page being turned. I'm your host, Nicole Raposo, and you're listening to Unsynchronized, the deep dive podcast where we get into how NSYNC got out of sync and eventually called it quits. Justin's 2001 wasn't defined by the most side projects or the busiest schedule. It was defined by how often he appeared in the spotlight, how the media framed him, and how the year positioned him in ways that didn't always match what the group was saying out loud. For what it's worth, I can't think of a better way to wrap up the biographical episodes for this season. Let's get into it. January 2001 opened with NSYNC Everywhere at Once, the People's Choice Awards on January 7th, the American Music Awards on the 8th. 2 back-to-back high-visibility appearances that reinforced the idea that the group was still operating as a single, unified machine. The AMAs gave Justin one unmistakable moment of individual visibility, and that was due to the now iconic denim-on-denim outfits that he wore with his then-girlfriend, Britney Spears. When the group sat down with Larry King on the 9th, the picture was still one of a unified group. The interview was full of crosstalk, the kind of overlapping chatter that happens when 5 people who know each other very well are all trying to answer the same questions at the same time. But within that noise, Justin's comments about the group's chemistry still stood out. He talked about how easily they communicate, how he could look at Chris and convey 10 things at the same time, and how that connection came from years of working together before the fame hit. It was a moment where he actively reinforced the idea that NSYNC wasn't just a business arrangement. It was a real friendship and a real bond. Larry pushed the question towards longevity, asking whether the group ever thought about what would happen if it all went away. Justin responded by contrasting NSYNC with New Kids on the Block, saying that their situation was different because their audience was the same age as they are, and that hopefully the fans will grow with them. He pointed to the Beatles, the Rolling Stones, and Aerosmith as examples of groups whose audiences stayed with them over time. Then, Larry asks whether they ever see themselves not being together. There was more crosstalk, more overlapping voices, but Justin's answer still cut through. Even if they weren't sitting there together, he said, he'd still be calling Chris to come over and write. Larry also asked about their dating lives, but the answer was different depending on who he was talking to. Lance joked that he dates everyone. Chris mentioned breaking up with an ex who he didn't name. Joey and JC both acknowledged that they were seeing somebody, but these were private citizens and they didn't offer many details. Justin was the only one in a public relationship, and because of that, his romance with Britney Spears became part of the broader narrative of the interview. That kind of thing wasn't unusual for the time. Their relationship was a big part of how the media framed him back then. But it does highlight how differently Justin's personal life was treated in comparison to the rest of the group. Within the next couple of weeks, his relationship with Britney became a topic for discussion again, but this time the reasons were different. On the 18th, E! Online's Awful Truth column claimed that NSYNC's next album could be their last one, at least for a while. The piece cited an insider telling columnist Ted Casablanca that the members all wanted to do their own thing, but that Justin had the biggest itch to go solo. Casablanca even asked if the smell of separation had the scent of Eau de Britney, implying that she might be influencing him. The next day, the Chicago Sun-Times followed with a piece suggesting that Justin wanted to go solo as soon as contractually possible, again with Britney supposedly encouraging it. What stands out to me is that early in the year, there were 2 members of NSYNC that were both dealing with the rumor mill churning around them. Joey's rumor, which I talked about in his episode, revolved around whether or not he was about to become a father. Justin's rumor revolved around whether he was about to give birth to something else entirely, which would be a solo career. On January 22nd, Justin logged in for an MSN live chat with some fans while the rest of the group rehearsed for the Super Bowl. There was no acknowledgement of the solo rumors here, but what he did say gave us a clear snapshot of where his head was creatively. When fans asked about the new album, he talked about aiming for a summer release and described their new material as taking the dirty pop vibe to the next level. He said that the new album would be more eclectic and that the group was pushing themselves creatively. The chat also gave us a little glimpse into the kinds of outside projects that Justin was considering at the time. When asked about more acting, he said he had been reading scripts but wasn't looking to push the lead or take anything that would require a long commitment. And almost in passing, he mentioned that he had just done a duet with Brian McKnight. In the moment, it was just a casual update, but it does help illustrate the range of side projects that he was already exploring while NSYNC was still active. He ended the chat by listing the group's upcoming appearances, the Super Bowl, the Grammys, and inducting Michael Jackson into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame in June, saying that after that they were going to lay low. It was a moment when Justin sounded open, enthusiastic, and fully invested in the group's next chapter. But it hits a little differently when you remember that this chat took place just after 4 days that the first round of solo rumors started hitting the press. And then on January 28th, NSYNC performed with Aerosmith, Mary J. Blige, Nelly, and Britney Spears during the Super Bowl 35 halftime show, kicking off another year of high-visibility performances for the group. Finishing off the month, Justin celebrated his 20th birthday on the 31st. He entered his 20s with rumors of reinvention swirling around him, but nothing implying separation, at least not yet. February was a light month. On the 3rd, a small music blog called Freaky Trigger published a blurb about a rumor that they pulled from the National Enquirer, claiming that Justin was working with Richard Marx on a solo album. This is not a mainstream outlet, and the tone was snarky, but it still shows that the idea of Justin going solo was continuing to circulate in the early part of the year. In the middle of the month, according to some fan-made sources, the group filmed their tribute performance for the MTV Icon television special honoring Janet Jackson. Director Billy Rainey said that the song and the video shoot were completed in one day. A quick, tightly scheduled production squeezed into an already packed calendar. March was the month when the rumors around Justin kept expanding, and the group's scattered schedules became more visible in small ways. On the 7th, Liz Smith reported that Justin had visited Michael Jackson at Neverland Ranch, supposedly with Britney joining him. It was the first contemporary rumor linking Michael and Justin creatively. Whether the visit was personal or professional, the effect was still the same. Justin was now being discussed in proximity to one of the biggest pop musicians in the world. 2 days later, Melinda Bell posted a journal entry on the official NSYNC website. In the post, she mentioned that all 5 members were juggling side projects while trying to record the new album. The tone wasn't dramatic. It was simply a matter-of-fact acknowledgement that everybody's schedules were busy and not always aligned. When MTV taped the Janet Jackson Icon special on March 10th, only Justin and Chris attended in person. It wasn't a solo appearance for Justin. He was still there as part of NSYNC. But the way the segment was structured placed him in a more favorable position, even if only for a brief amount of time. Chris played the straight man, offering a sincere, appreciative introduction to the tribute video. Justin followed with a lighter, more comedic tone, repeating how fine Janet Jackson was. His comments didn't add much substance, but they provided a moment of levity the segment was designed to deliver. It was a lighthearted setup for NSYNC's video, but it also showed how, even in a group context, the framing could still tilt towards Justin. By March 12th, the idea of Justin working independently was circulating in fan spaces too, not just tabloids and gossip websites. A fan site on Angel Fire called 1 in a Million posted a rumor claiming that Justin had been seen working alone in a studio and that Britney had brainwashed him into going solo. There was no source for this rumor and no credibility, but it showed that the earliest rumors continued to persist. When the Icon special aired on March 13th, NSYNC's tribute video was shown, and Justin appeared in both the pre-recorded performance and as one of the 2 members who attended the taping. All 5 members of NSYNC attended Michael Jackson's induction into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame on March 19th, not in June, like what Justin said in his web chat. It was yet another high-profile appearance for NSYNC in early 2001, and it was a moment of cohesion before the group splintered off again, going into different directions and different obligations. On March 20th, MTV reported that NSYNC was in the studio with the Neptunes that week, and it was framed as a group session, but who was there wasn't specified in the article. Still, the public takeaway was simple. The group was working on the new album. It was reassuring news for waiting fans, even if the reality of who was in the room on which days was more complicated. April was a month when Justin's individual visibility became unmistakable. Not because he was separating from NSYNC at that point, but because the industry and the media were beginning to treat him as someone with his own orbit. Yamaha All Access magazine's summer 2001 issue teased an interview with NSYNC on the cover, but the only members who were questioned were actually Justin and JC. They both answered questions about misconceptions about the group. They talked about being respected as musicians. And when asked about how the group had gotten into songwriting, the contrast between their answers was pretty striking. JC emphasized growth and craft, saying that they had been writing since the early days and that it took time, repetition, and confidence before they felt like their stuff was good enough to put on the record this time. Justin's answer was very different. He focused on output and authorship, listing the songs that he had written for the upcoming album. Up Against the Wall, Pop, Celebrity, See Right Through You, Gone, and Something Like You. It was one of the earliest moments where Justin publicly positioned himself as a primary songwriter, as a creative driver within NSYNC rather than part of a collective process. On April 10th, TV Guide reported that Justin had signed a 7-figure book deal with Ballantine Books for Crossover Dribble, a fictional basketball novel. It was the first major solo-branded business venture of his career, something with only his name on it, separate from NSYNC. Entertainment Weekly talked about the deal, too, in mid-April, but with added details. The book centered on a high school basketball prodigy named Justin Woodriver, modeled on a white Michael Jordan archetype. One editor who passed over the project noted that the people most likely to buy a Justin Timberlake book were teenage girls, who were not the audience for a sports novel, but the premise leaned towards a boys' sports thriller. The way they described it, it sounded like a mismatch between the intended market and Justin's actual fan base. Together, the TV Guide and Entertainment Weekly reports showed a big picture. Justin had signed a serious high-dollar publishing deal, and he was expected to deliver a manuscript by fall. What's also worth noting is that the media was framing his book deal in relation to Britney Spears' deal with Ballantine Books, which, yet again, reinforced how tightly linked their public narratives were at the time. Also on April 10th, JC, Justin, and Chris attended the Blockbuster Entertainment Awards. Lance and Joey were in Toronto filming On the Line. For Justin, it was another visibility moment as one of 3 members representing NSYNC publicly. The group did a brief, humorous red carpet interview with Will Sasso and Alex Borstein from Mad TV. It was quick and it was funny. Nothing major, just another instance of Justin being publicly visible that month. A couple of days later, on the 12th, MTV published an article previewing the upcoming tour and confirming that fans would hear new music on the road. While it's worth noting that Justin said he hoped everybody wasn't sick of NSYNC by that point, the most significant part of the article was Justin's comments about Michael Jackson. For the first time, he publicly confirmed that multiple meetings had happened, and he did it with a mix of humor and uncertainty. I had a couple of meetings with the man himself, and he's an extraordinary artist. He kicked me out of the meeting because I wouldn't stop asking for autographs, so I don't know how far it's going to go. The article didn't frame the meeting as a solo collaboration, but MTV made it clear that Justin had been in conversations that no one else in the group had been part of. On April 25th, all 5 members of NSYNC appeared together via satellite for a special episode of Total Request Live called TRL at Your House. The episode was light and fan-driven, just like any typical TRL episode, but things shifted a little bit when a girl in the audience asked Justin directly if he was planning a solo project. He denied it immediately. No, I'm not working on a solo album. They're all looking at me like, what? No. What? No, that's not true. We've been in the studio working on Celebrity, the new record. So that's all I've been doing. What stands out isn't the denial itself, but the moment around it. Justin joked that the rest of the group was looking at him in disbelief, but their real reactions were pretty mild. Chris looked bored. JC looked at Justin while he spoke and then turned back to the camera when he was done. Joey barely reacted, and Lance only reacted a little. The strongest reaction in the room came from Justin himself. So far, this is the only thing I've found where Justin responded to the solo rumors directly and publicly in 2001. May was the month when the celebrity album finally began taking shape in a concrete way, and when the public narrative around Justin and the group became more complicated. The recording schedule was uneven, the tour was delayed, and the solo rumors were still circulating loudly enough for someone to address them again. According to the sequencing later described in Rolling Stone, NSYNC spent early to mid-May recording with the Neptunes. On the particular day the article captured, Justin and Chris were in the studio with Pharrell first, while Joey and JC were reportedly scheduled to come in later to record their parts. This doesn't seem unusual for the group. It's not unheard of to record in staggered sessions, but I think that it also reflected the fragmented way that the celebrity album was being pieced together, even if that framing wasn't intentional. On May 9th, MTV reported that the Pop Odyssey tour had been pushed back to the 23rd, citing the addition of new staging elements. The article also noted that NSYNC wasn't quite done recording the album, though there wasn't a specific explanation offered as to why Celebrity was being delayed. So, in a nutshell, the show was getting bigger, and the album wasn't finished yet. May 13th was the date the group started filming the music video for Pop, which was later confirmed by MTV's Making the Video special. Justin's standout moment was the opening sequence for the music video, where he played a TV pitchman trying to sell the viewer on the fictional Pop product. It was the first major visual piece of the celebrity era, and Justin was positioned front and center. A few days later on the 17th, Melinda Bell addressed solo rumors once again, this time in response to a web chat question. But even in offering a blanket denial, I think the first few months of 2001 show that the speculation about solo rumors had followed Justin the most persistently. The fact that the question kept resurfacing and kept needing to be answered showed how deeply the narrative had taken hold by that point. On May 18th, Entertainment Weekly published a group interview that was part of its special summer music content. I can't believe I forgot to clarify this in Lance's episode, but that interview that I traced to late April but couldn't find a publication date for, I finally found it. That interview is what was published by Entertainment Weekly on the 18th. Anyway, this piece landed at a pivotal moment in the celebrity timeline because it captured how the members were publicly describing their roles while the album was still being assembled. In this interview, Justin emerged as kind of a spokesperson of sorts. He fielded the questions about sales pressure. He positioned himself as the one who could articulate the group's creative stance. He also emphasized songwriting as a form of validation, and he also drew some clear boundaries around privacy, showing a growing awareness of how much of his personal life was being consumed by the public. It wasn't a solo interview, but it was a moment when Justin's leadership in shaping NSYNC's public identity became prominent. The Pop Odyssey tour officially launched on May 23rd. It had been the group's most ambitious tour to date, and it marked the beginning of the celebrity era in earnest. The tour launched with only one single out, which was Pop, and its video didn't even premiere until nearly 1 week after the tour had kicked off. The next single wouldn't arrive until August, near the end of the tour, which just underscored how backwards this rollout really was. June was one of the most uniformly group-focused stretches of 2001. With the Pop Odyssey tour running at full speed, the schedule left no room for solo press, side projects, or much individual visibility. Pop Odyssey dominated everything. Every city, every appearance, and every moment of public visibility was directly tied to the tour. After months of uneven press cycles and recurring questions about the group's future, June offered something unusual. A stretch of time where Justin's presence was entirely and unmistakably tied to NSYNC as a unit. It was the clearest contrast yet to the narrative that had been building around him all spring. My research didn't show any solo activities or solo-leaning events for Justin in June. Like the rest of the group, he was focused on the Pop Odyssey tour. But that wasn't the only thing they had going on that month. They also made some appearances, like when NSYNC showed up on BET's 106 in Park. It was one of the few times NSYNC appeared on BET at all, and even here, the focus mostly remained on the entire group. The show was upbeat, quick, and firmly rooted in the Pop Odyssey rollout. Nothing about it pointed towards individual narratives or solo future plans. So June reads as a moment of stillness in an otherwise turbulent year. It was a little stretch of time where the group moved as one, and the schedule allowed little room for outside projects. Justin's visibility aligned completely with NSYNC's in this month. July was the month when the media narrative around NSYNC, and especially Justin, crystallized. 2 major print features, a Billboard profile, a Canadian magazine interview, and the release of Celebrity all landed within weeks of each other. The result was a public reframing of the group's identity and their musical ambitions, and also Justin's role within the creative hierarchy. By the end of the month, the story the press was telling about NSYNC was no longer about 5 members. It was centered mainly on one. The August 2001 issue of Vibe magazine hit newsstands in July, and it became one of the most consequential media moments of the Celebrity era. Not because of what it revealed about the group's musical direction, but because of how it framed NSYNC within a racialized pop and R&B landscape. Writer Mimi Valdez approached the profile as a gatekeeper, positioning the group as outsiders being granted acceptance within R&B spaces, while also giving readers permission to admit that NSYNC was a group of talented white boys. Within that framing, Justin emerged as the member who was most aligned with R&B credibility, describing himself as a corn-fed white boy from the hills of Tennessee who grew up listening to Marvin Gaye, Al Green, Stevie Wonder, and The Temptations. But the most revealing comment came when he addressed the racialized constraints of the music industry. For context, in the article, Valdez claimed that the group said that being Black could have made it easier for them to get signed in the 90s, but that their success likely wouldn't have been as big afterwards. Valdez also claimed NSYNC's sound always had a sweet pop edge that many R&B groups were not willing or allowed to embrace. To accentuate that point, she used this quote from Justin. "If we were an African-American group, they wouldn't let us do the music that we're doing. A record label would have said, 'No, that doesn't work for what y'all look like.' It's truly sad because at the end of the day, it's all music." At the time, the comment that drew the most public criticism was Jay-Z's Ghetto Pass comment. And in his episode, we already talked about why people didn't like that. But in hindsight, I think Justin's quote is more structurally harmful because it feeds into the myth that Black artists are restricted from making melodic, pop-leaning R&B. It doesn't make sense for someone who leans on R&B to claim that Black artists who also lean on R&B would be restricted from making the music that they're already making, especially when this person cites Marvin Gaye, Stevie Wonder, and The Temptations as musicians he grew up on. These men were foundational in creating R&B that was considered crossover music that could appeal to mainstream white audiences and make lots of money for executives, i.e., the same people Justin says would have discouraged them. Because Mimi Valdez had already set up a false binary, with one side being NSYNC allowed to make melodic and pop-oriented music, and the other side being Black R&B artists who supposedly weren't allowed to do that, the article created the perfect runway for Justin's statement to land without being challenged. Mimi didn't put the words in his mouth, but her framing made the logic seem plausible, even when it collapses under the weight of musical history and common sense. The backlash at the time focused almost entirely on JC, and I think it's probably because it was the more obvious misstep, so it was easier for people to latch on to. Justin's comment was arguably more damaging, but it went largely unexamined. And in the broader arc of his 2001 to 2002 trajectory, this moment, to an extent, foreshadows what would come next, including a Chad Hugo anecdote from 2002 where Justin again framed himself as a white artist doing Black music, but this time as a marketing advantage. We'll get into that when the time comes in season 2. For right now, the Vibe article wasn't just a snapshot of the group in July. It was a moment when the racialized assumptions shaping the Celebrity era were laid bare, and where the editorial framing allowed those assumptions to stand unchallenged. Then there was the Rolling Stone cover story, which was a group profile, but its internal structure made the hierarchy unmistakable. Chris was the underdog and the comic relief. Joey was flirty and friendly. Lance was mostly quiet and business-minded. JC was shy, serious, and almost a little too refined. Justin was the only member presented as a fully dimensional person, someone with spirituality, ambition, musical lineage, and a strong sense of artistic identity. The article even framed Justin and Britney as having sold 70 million records, a phrase that quietly erased most of NSYNC and positioned Justin as an individual commercial force months before he had released anything on his own. I think that was one of the clearest signs that the piece wasn't really meant to be about the group as a whole. It was meant to be about Justin. Writer Touré's framing of Justin was explicitly racialized, and it was positioned as something positive. In the article, his proximity to authentic Blackness was mediated by things like being embraced by the group's Black bodyguards, some of whom nicknamed him Youngblood. Things like watching the original Kings of Comedy or wearing a Jimi Hendrix t-shirt. And of course, the list of musicians that he cited as influences on his own musicality. The article gave Justin interiority by discussing his thoughts on meditation, spirituality, transcendence, all things and all attention that no other member in the group received. The article also connected him directly to Michael Jackson through producer BT's comparison of Justin's vocal tone and rhythmic instincts to the King of Pop. But I think the most important line in the entire article, though, was Pharrell Williams' comment about Justin's musicality and his soulfulness. Specifically, Pharrell said, when it's time for his solo, he might just do it. The operative word was when, not if. Pharrell spoke like someone who had already worked with Justin privately and already heard him outside the group context. This comment doesn't come off so much as a guess or a prediction as it does an acknowledgement. On July 7th, Billboard published a feature that reinforced the same hierarchy. Justin's quotes anchored the piece, and he articulated NSYNC's artistic mission for their upcoming release. He talked about being tired of critics, connection with the audience, fusing different musical genres, and the need to re-educate listeners about what pop music really is. This article didn't just quote Justin, it relied on him as a significant part of its substance. In mid-July, Maclean's published an interview that made the group's public roles even clearer. Only Lance, Joey, and Justin were asked about outside projects. Chris received no questions about Fu Manskito, despite the line being in major department stores, and JC was asked nothing about his contributions to the new album, even though he had contributed several songs. Justin, meanwhile, was pretty much positioned as the creative center in this piece. He discussed writing the song Pop, defended the group's musicianship, and casually mentioned writing a fiction book, a detail that reinforced his image as the member with an expansive creative identity. By the time Celebrity was released on July 24th, the media had already set the stage. The album landed like the climax of the entire first half of 2001. Justin had 7 songwriting credits, more than half the album, marking his largest creative contribution to date. Most of those songs were co-written with Wade Robson, a collaboration that signaled Justin's desire to experiment outside of the group's traditional creative structure. The album's sound leaned into some of the R&B influences that Justin had been naming all year, but it also included some newer sounds like dubstep and UK garage. Songs like Gone, Girlfriend, See Right Through You, and Up Against the Wall made Justin's artistic identity audible. And because the press had already framed him as the creative center, the release of the group's third album increased the spotlight that was already shining on Justin. The album sold nearly 1.9 million copies in its first week, which was a huge number, though some media critics framed it as a disappointment because it didn't break NSYNC's previous record. This was a narrative that Justin had predicted previously in the Entertainment Weekly interview published in May. August is a month when the media's focus on Justin increases even more. The Arena Homme Plus interview and photo shoot were some of the earliest pieces of press where Justin was positioned as a standalone cultural figure. A solo TV appearance and the filming of the group's next music video reinforced that same positioning. There was some group unity during the month, but by the end of August, the idea of Justin as an individual artist wasn't really speculative so much as it was increasingly visible. The Arena Homme Plus feature is one of the most important artifacts of Justin's 2001 media presence. It wasn't just an interview about music, it was a fashion editorial, and that distinction matters. Fashion profiles don't have to treat the subject as part of a group, even if they are one. The subject gets treated as a persona, a brand, and an isolated figure. And that's exactly what happened here. The styling, the tone, the photography, and the editorial framing all position Justin as an adult, and as someone with a trajectory beyond the group he was still publicly committed to. Before the interview even begins, Arena Homme Plus sets Justin up in a way that feels unusually dense. Almost like the writer was trying to weave together a few different narratives all at the same time. The introduction to the piece started with NSYNC's sales figures, but only as a springboard to basically elevate Justin above the group. The writer asked what distinguished NSYNC from other boy bands at the time, but then immediately answered his own question by singling out Justin as the not-so-secret weapon, the one reshaping the group's sound, and the one who was working with the Neptunes, the one making the group's music dirtier and grittier. NSYNC is present, but peripherally, and only as the context for explaining why Justin is the one who stands out. The introduction to the article also included some racialized framing that was pretty hard to miss. The writer compared Justin to Elvis, explicitly calling him a white kid with great pipes and an equally strong instinct for making Black music accessible to the masses. It's a familiar cultural script. The white performer positioned as a bridge between Black musical forms and mainstream audiences. But it doesn't stop there. The writer also invoked Michael Jackson only to suggest that the Celebrity album is something that Jackson should have made by now. It was a way of positioning Justin as an artist that was now carrying a specific artistic lineage forward. And these comparisons did a lot of work in shaping how the reader was supposed to understand Justin's musical identity. From there, the introduction to the article shifts again, but this time into a bunch of biographical details that seem almost stitched together. They mention Star Search, they mention the Mickey Mouse Club, they mention his first kiss with Britney. And then there was a long anecdote from a former middle school teacher who was working with NSYNC's management at the time. She described Justin as gifted, shy, competitive, homecoming king, basically a list of descriptions and accolades that read less like a portrait of an artist and more like a resume or a CV. None of these details are wrong necessarily, but the way they're assembled gives the introduction a slightly disjointed quality. It seems like the goal was to mention these things simply to make Justin sound as appealing as possible and to make him sound highly exceptional on an individual level. So looking at all of the different pieces of the introduction together, it's not just setting the stage for some interview. The comparisons, the anecdotes, the musical positioning, all of these things are working together to present Justin as someone who is distinct from NSYNC, someone with a different trajectory, and someone who's already being understood as more than just 1/5 of a popular boy band. So before Justin even speaks, the article had already begun to separate him from the collective identity that had defined his career up to that point. Returning to the making Black music accessible comment for a moment, it wasn't just part of the article's setup. The interview itself picked up that same thread almost immediately. When Justin mentioned that NSYNC's videos were in rotation on BET, the interviewer extrapolated that into the broader claim that NSYNC was appealing to African American audiences more and more these days. Justin didn't push back against the comment. He just responded by saying that the group was bridging cultural gaps. This matters because it shows that the racialized narrative that we saw in Vibe magazine and also in Rolling Stone with Touré's write-up was really more of a pattern and not an isolated thing. And this narrative around NSYNC and around Justin specifically was part of a broader push in 2001 that positioned him as a white artist with proximity to Black music, Black audiences, and Black cultural legitimacy. Another thing worth noting about the interview is that the shift from band member to singular figure was very subtle, but it was still present. When the interviewer asked whether Justin was worried about having a distinctive public image outside of the group, Justin gave an answer that I think is very revealing about how he was publicly managing the tension between individuality and group loyalty. The question was, are you worried about having a distinctive public image outside of NSYNC? Justin replied, I don't think any of us look at it that way. We don't even think of ourselves as NSYNC. I think of each of them as being their own person. So establishing myself as an individual is not a priority. It's just something everyone's going to do because everyone is an individual. But all 5 of us are friends, and that makes a big damn difference. There have been record companies that have put groups together and they don't work out, but we practically live together. If you're not friends, it's going to show. We've had problems, but there's never been a problem we couldn't work out because we have that friendship. Even if we stopped selling records tomorrow, we'd still be friends. On the surface, Justin's answer sounds like a general statement about individuality. But in the context of 2001, which was a year filled with rumors about the group doing their own thing, and with people saying that Justin in particular had the biggest itch to go solo, I think his response lands a little differently. It reads less like a philosophical musing and more like a soft acknowledgement of a shift that may have already been underway. He frames individuation as something that's natural and inevitable, not a choice. And in doing so, whether it was planned or not, he ended up echoing some of the very same language that had been circulating in the press since January. That theme of separating the public image from the private reality came up again a few questions later, when Justin was asked how he views the last few years of NSYNC's career. His answer was surprisingly blunt. He called it chaos, and then explained that the title celebrity was meant to be a contrast of the glitzy exterior with the more grounded reality of who they were behind the scenes. And to illustrate his point, he talked about the album packaging, glossy on the outside, documentary-style photos on the inside, as a metaphor for that disconnect. Then he ended his comment with a line that echoed the individuation that he had already been hinting at. If we weren't in sync, we'd still be who we are. It's another moment where he subtly separates the members' identities from the group's identity, reinforcing the idea that NSYNC was something they did, not something they were. The interview also reinforced Justin's growing creative authority within NSYNC. When discussing the new album, he compared the group's artistic evolution to the Beatles and the Rolling Stones, not to other boy bands. He called Celebrity their puberty record and a growth record, something that signaled artistic maturity rather than commercial repetition. But yet, there was a bit of contradiction in the way Justin talked about creativity in the interview. Early in the piece, when asked what makes him different from the other 4 members in terms of creativity, he gave a very group-friendly, PR-friendly answer. NSYNC's creative process was unconscious, it was collective, it was democratic, and that everybody had ideas and they all feed off of each other. But later, when he was asked about songwriting, he described a more insular process, one that was centered almost entirely around his partnership with Wade Robson, the man he described as the other half of him as far as creativity goes. It was subtle, but it was also revealing. It showed 2 narratives that Justin was balancing in 2001. The public obligation to present NSYNC as a unified creative unit, and the private reality of an emerging individual artistic identity built around a single collaborator. The last thing I think worth highlighting from this interview is Justin's response to a question about self-trust. He explained his belief that people should act first rather than think first, because thinking invites insecurity. He described words as something he was starting to see as the most useless form of communication, and said that he trusted himself most of all when he was acting on instinct instead of deliberation. He also believed that people in the entertainment business were full of BS and they talked a lot of crap, but that the great ones are the ones who walk the walk. At the time, it just reads like some philosophy from, I guess, your average 20-year-old guy. But in the context of what would happen with Unsync over the next year, and really over the next couple of years, it becomes a key to understanding his approach. Justin was describing a worldview where action mattered more than discussion, where instincts mattered more than communication, and where transitions happened through doing rather than talking. It's not hard to see how that kind of mindset would contribute to the group's confusion in 2002, when it seems decisions were made privately and explained, if at all, only after the fact. 5 days later, Justin appears on the primetime premiere of The Wayne Brady Show. This wasn't a group booking, it was only for Justin. Wayne Brady told TV Guide that he invited Justin personally, and that he said yes immediately. During the premiere, Justin, Wayne Brady, and Brian McKnight improvised a love song together. And in that moment, Justin wasn't just some teen idol being humored. He was being treated as a peer to two established adult performers. But before the broadcast came this revelation. Brady told TV Guide that he, Justin, Brian McKnight, and some members of the group All for One were already working on songs together with the hopes of releasing a CD the following year. The TV Guide article asked if this was the segue to an eventual Justin solo project. Wayne wouldn't answer the question, but he ended the article with the line that's most relevant to Unsynchronized. That's the guy to be on the lookout for after the NSYNC thing is finished. What really stands out about this comment is how it entered the public record. Because Wayne wasn't part of NSYNC's team, his statement reads like a neutral party making an observation. But I think the effect might be the same as something that media strategists call a trial balloon, which is when a public comment is floated by somebody outside of the core group just to test how people react to it. I think the timing is also worth commenting on when it comes to this. That TV Guide article was published at 1 p.m. Pacific time on August 8th, so just hours before the primetime premiere of Wayne's variety show. That timing matters. It means that the quote wasn't just a reaction to Justin's performance, because they hadn't improvised the song yet. This was part of the pre-air publicity and part of the official framing of that episode of his show. Also, Celebrity had only been out for about 2 weeks, and the group was still promoting the album. So hearing someone, especially somebody outside of NSYNC's orbit, say that Justin was the one to watch after the NSYNC thing is finished makes it sound like the end of the group was already a foregone conclusion, or at least something that was known to outsiders before the group had any idea. I'm not telling you what to believe. I'm just asking you to think about whether Wayne's comment sounds like just an opinion or something closer to a trial balloon. On August 15th, Publishers Weekly posted a fall 2001 hardcover preview that included Justin's novel as one of the books to look out for. By this point, the book had a new title, Inside Drive, a novel of basketball, life, and love. The listing included a November release date, a $16.95 hardcover price, an advertising budget, and even mentioned a 6-city author tour. The catalog copy describes the book as a story about championship basketball, movie stars, and issues of race and love. A far more ambitious plot than the original sports novel pitch. On August 20th, NSYNC performed on the Today Show as part of the summer concert series. It was a full group appearance and one of the last major non-tour performances of the year. Then later in August, towards the end of the month, the group filmed the music video for Gone. Although it was an NSYNC-branded release, the video and the song centered on Justin almost exclusively. This is something that all 5 members of NSYNC participated in, but it wasn't pivotal for most of the group the way that it was for Justin, since he was positioned as the emotional center of the song and the music video's narrative. And toward the very end of the month, on the 28th, Brian McKnight released his album Superhero, which included My Kind of Girl, the duet he recorded with Justin. It wasn't a major promotional moment for Justin in the way that Gone was, but it was still part of the late summer pattern where Justin's voice and presence were showing up in places outside of the group's core activities. And even when the focus was on the Pop Odyssey tour, these small external appearances kept reinforcing Justin's individual visibility heading into the fall. September 2001 was a month defined by interruption. The Pop Odyssey tour ended, the group appeared at several high-profile events, and then the entire entertainment industry came to a sudden stop. In the midst of that pause, Gone, a song already centered around Justin, became the group's next released music video. The contrast between the national stillness and Justin's growing artistic visibility became one of the defining tensions of the month. On September 1st, the Pop Odyssey tour came to an end after dominating NSYNC's schedule for months. Its conclusion marked one of the first major pauses in the group's year, a little moment to breathe before a packed week of appearances and, unknowingly, before the world changes. On September 6th, the group performed at the MTV Video Music Awards. It was one of their last major award show appearances as a unit, and the night became a late summer high point for them. They walked away with 4 Moon Men, gave a high-energy performance, and left crowd with the overall feeling that NSYNC was still operating at peak visibility. Soon after, the group participated in the All-Star Celebrity charity recording of the song What's Going On. They joined dozens of other artists in a project that spanned multiple sessions before and after the September 11th attacks. Justin appeared as part of the larger group, and the recording becomes one of the last collaborative industry events before everything shut down. Around the same time, NSYNC also participated in Michael Jackson's 30th anniversary celebration at Madison Square Garden. The concerts were filmed on September 7th and September 10th, and they became historically significant because they happened just a few days before the attacks. Justin was part of the group performance alongside the Jacksons, but no standout moments for him. And then September 11th happens, and the entertainment industry comes to a halt. NSYNC's schedule slows down dramatically, and the group enters a period of near total public quiet. Even Justin's Arena Homme Plus cover, which, as I mentioned, was photographed in early August and had been reportedly scheduled for release around this time, became caught up in the moment. The original magazine issue featured a graphic, stylized cover image of Justin with a bloody mouth. It was pulled in the aftermath of the attacks, and a revised version with a new cover was later released. The 17th gave us the release of NSYNC's Hotline Fantasy Phone CD-ROM game, a fun promotional product that kept the group faintly visible during a time when most of entertainment had stopped. It was one of the only NSYNC-related releases to emerge during this national pause. But arguably, the month's most important moment arrived towards the end. On September 26th, the music video for Gone premiered on TRL. In a month defined by stillness, Gone became the group's quiet re-entry point into the public sphere, while also being the clearest sign of Justin's artistic centrality. The song was structured almost entirely around his vocals, and the video reinforced him as the emotional center of the narrative. It becomes the first NSYNC single where Justin is effectively the lead artist. In the context of the national pause, Gone landed with even more weight. It's a song that's subdued and introspective, a stark contrast to the spectacle of the Pop Odyssey tour and the high-energy performances of the summer. September became the hinge between two worlds, the end of the Pop Odyssey era and the beginning of a quieter, more Justin-forward phase. The country was still, the entertainment industry was still, but Justin's visibility, even within the group, was continuing to sharpen. October is the month when the divergence among the members of NSYNC becomes a bit more visible. The group appears together at major events, but the media cycle increasingly centers on Justin as an individual, and this happens through talks of cancellations, rumors, and also solo-framed editorial coverage. Even some of the setbacks are Justin-specific, which is a shift in itself. On October 15th, the first confirmed commercial release of the Gone CD single appears in Australia. The track listing included the radio edit of Gone, the radio edit in Spanish for the song, the album version, and the bonus track I'll Be Good For You, which is actually a previously unreleased song from No Strings Attached. This was the earliest verifiable standalone release of Gone I could find as a CD single, and it seems like it marked the beginning of the song's international rollout as its own product. This reinforced what the video and the US radio push had already made clear, which was that Justin was the visual and vocal center of the track. On the 21st, NSYNC performed at the post-9/11 United We Stand charity concert organized by Michael Jackson. A few days later, Japan received its own commercial maxi single for the song Gone. But this single had a slightly different configuration. The radio edit, the album version, the bonus track I'll Be Good For You, and then the database remix of the single Pop. The Japanese release confirms that Gone was being marketed internationally as a standalone product, not simply part of Celebrity. The inclusion of I'll Be Good For You, the only Justin co-written song on No Strings Attached, further reinforced the Justin forward framing of the single. By late October, Gone was no longer just the song on the album. Because it was a global single, it was a global Justin moment. Late October also brought the announcement of the European commercial release of the Gone single. Documentation for European singles in 2001 is pretty inconsistent, but based on what I could find, it seems like the announcement that came through on October 28th was for the single that would be released in the Benelux region on November 5th. I found a fan-circulated CD Now listing that cited November 6th. Given the typical variance in retailer dates, I think it's pretty reasonable to conclude that the single's rollout was planned for the first week of November, whether that ended up being the 5th or the 6th. Either way, timing matters. Gone was already functioning as a Justin forward track, and the international single release reinforced that framing. Also in late October, multiple outlets reported on the cancellation of Justin's deal with Ballantine Books. The Orlando Sentinel reported that the publisher wanted Justin to do a multi-city promotional tour, but he couldn't commit to it. Billboard reported the same thing, with a Los Angeles-based publicist saying that he had too much going on to give it the kind of time he wanted to, that he hadn't finished the book, and that he wouldn't be seeking a new publisher. Given how packed the year had been for him in terms of the Celebrity album and the Pop Odyssey tour, I think anyone would understand how he was too busy to work on the manuscript. But what stands out the most to me is that Justin had a publicist in Los Angeles, and that's where Billboard got their comments from. I found that noteworthy considering how many times comments from spokespeople for members of the group came through Jive's publicity, and I think this detail might suggest that his individual projects were already being managed separately from those of the group. On October 30th, Entertainment Weekly reported about the failed book deal also, but they included a little something about a rumor that had been circulating around Justin for a while. The rumor was that he would be appearing on the sitcom Friends, playing a stylist. Representatives for both Justin and for the show denied it. Even though the rumor was false, the existence still mattered, because the rumor still positioned Justin as a solo media figure, and it was something that still softly launched the idea of him as a standalone celebrity with crossover appeal. This is the kind of rumor that follows individual entertainers, not boy band members. Also in October, Justin appeared solo on the cover of Cosmopolitan's November 2001 issue. This was a major editorial moment because Cosmopolitan is a women's lifestyle magazine, not a teen magazine or a music magazine. Even though the article was lighthearted, the framing was adult and individual. Justin was positioned as a young man, not just as a boy band member. Actually, the group was only mentioned in passing. The focus of the article was Justin's personality and his relationship with Britney Spears. And even though it was a stark contrast with the Arena Homme Plus editorial, it still gave the same vibe. There were two different audiences, but it was the same push towards individualization. One last thing for October, I'm still trying to nail down the exact date on this, but according to some fan-created sources, Justin called into BET's 106 in Park to promote the song Gone. The segment ended up revealing more than he probably intended, and also probably more than the hosts intended to. The song's origin story was a throwaway anecdote about a girlfriend taking a long time at the beauty shop. He casually admitted that he didn't originally write the song for us, meaning for NSYNC, and it seems like the VJs made it a point to talk about how the song was, in their words, breaking into the urban market. That sounded to me like a label talking point that may or may not have matched the actual radio reality, but very much reflected a certain push towards framing Justin and his song in a particular light. Throughout the call, Justin talks around the group rather than about it. He centered himself in the video's emotional narrative. He avoids using the group's name except when required to introduce the video clip. I think this interview may have functioned as an early snapshot of Justin's emerging solo identity even during the Celebrity era, and even though the group was still publicly active. So overall, October was a month when the split starts to become a little visible. NSYNC is still present, and they still perform together and appear together at times, but the media cycle isn't centered on NSYNC as a unit anymore. Through international single releases, charity concerts, canceled solo projects, denied rumors, and adult-oriented editorial coverage, the narrative starts shifting more towards Justin. His individual visibility becomes the story. November was another relatively quiet month for Justin in terms of solo activity, but it still had several public moments that contributed to his growing visibility separate from NSYNC. And early in the month, there was also a private moment, or maybe an almost moment, that would become more important after the group separated in the following year. Justin appeared on the cover of YM Magazine's December issue, which was released in November. The interview itself was lighthearted and typical teen magazine content, but the framing was unmistakably solo. Justin was alone on the cover, Justin alone was in the feature, and Justin alone was answering questions about his life, his interests, and his personality. Even if the tone wasn't serious, the exposure still mattered. In his interview with the Director Brazil podcast, choreographer Marty Kudelka described a failed meetup with Justin that was supposed to happen in Toronto after one of Britney Spears' tour dates. Multiple sources state that the Dream Within a Dream tour included a concert at the Air Canada Centre on November 5, 2001. So that places the misconnection in early November. According to Marty, he'd received multiple calls from Dave, the group's tour manager, saying that Justin wanted to meet with him. Marty thought it was a joke until a friend of his told him that it wasn't. He did end up speaking with Dave, and he was told that Justin wanted to meet with him. As I mentioned, the meeting didn't happen. But the message was relayed to Marty that it was fine because they wanted to hire him anyway. It's not clear from his interview who they were or why the meeting was arranged through the group's tour manager rather than through the group itself. But the attempt marks the moment that Marty first entered Justin's orbit, and that's a detail that becomes more relevant in the following year. In November, NSYNC had a handful of public appearances. On the 11th, they performed at the Veterans Day concert on Miami's South Beach. Then on the 20th, they returned to MTV's Total Request Live, their first in-person appearance on TRL in months. The following day, November 21st, they appeared on BET's 106 in Park for a second time. These were group events, but they kept Justin visible in the broader pop culture landscape during a month when he wasn't promoting anything individually. Also on November 21st, MTV News reported that Justin had been cast as young Elton John in the music video for This Train Don't Stop There Anymore. The video was filmed the previous weekend in Los Angeles by director David LaChapelle. Actor Paul Reubens appeared in the video as Elton's manager, and according to a LaChapelle spokesperson, Justin was the first choice for this role and accepted immediately. It wasn't a full acting role, but it was acting adjacent. It was a moment of heightened solo visibility for Justin towards the end of the year, and it placed him in a narrative context outside of NSYNC, positioning him as somebody who could carry a character on his own on screen. December 2001 was the month when public and private narratives started to diverge even more. On the surface, NSYNC still appeared to be a functioning, unified group. But behind the scenes, communication inside the group seemed to be getting inconsistent, and the way information was being shared, or not shared, became one of the clearest indicators of what was coming. On the 4th, NSYNC performed Gone at the Billboard Music Awards and joined the All-Stars Collective for a live version of the charity single What's Going On. The group won 4 awards that night, reaffirming their position as one of pop music's most successful acts. Though it wasn't reported until early 2002, singer Angie Stone recalled Justin telling her how much he loved her work, saying, "Your CD's in my car right now. You have to work on my solo project." This is something that happened around the time of the Billboard Music Awards, according to Angie, and it became one of the earliest documented private moves towards a solo identity. That same week, Rolling Stone released its December 6th People of the Year issue. NSYNC received the title, but only Justin was interviewed for the feature. Functionally, it operated as a solo profile presented as group coverage, reinforcing the individual visibility that had been following and increasing throughout the course of the year. Earlier in 2001, Rolling Stone had already framed him as the only fully dimensional member of NSYNC, so this continuation in December was not really surprising. On the 7th, a press release announced that Justin was signed on to a wireless fan club subscription service through J-Core Entertainment. Press releases grouped him with Britney Spears and Jay-Z as examples of the caliber of celebrities that fans could expect to get automated calls and other exclusive goodies from if they joined the program. This was Justin-only branding, and it showed that he was being treated as a standalone commercial entity. Then, on December 8th, NSYNC held the Challenge for the Children holiday event at Point Orlando. It was one of their final group charity appearances for the year. On the 19th, MTV aired the group's Secret Santa holiday special. This public appearance had a private counterpart. After filming, Lance Bass later recalled relaxing in a hotel room with Joey Fatone when Justin came in and told them he wanted the group to take a 6-month break the following year. When the idea of a solo album came up, Lance doesn't remember feeling alarmed or threatened. In his opinion, the group had taken breaks before and survived, so he wasn't opposed to Justin doing a solo album because he thought that individual projects would ultimately strengthen NSYNC. Lance is the only member of the group who has ever described how he remembered the December conversation unfolding. Justin has never confirmed or contradicted his version of events, and none of the other members of NSYNC have ever offered their own versions of events. So based on the way Lance described it, the conversation didn't happen as a group discussion. It happened in pieces. And this fragmented structure is important because NSYNC wasn't an after-school hobby or some kind of casual creative project. They were an internationally successful group generating millions of dollars in revenue. In any organization that operates at that scale, major developments, especially ones that could affect the business's future, are generally expected to be communicated openly and with all of the important stakeholders receiving the information at the same time. That doesn't seem to have happened here. Instead, some members received the news privately, without knowing whether the others had heard the same thing or how they had responded. Information delivered this way prevented the group from forming a shared understanding of what was being proposed, and also from responding collectively to a decision that would affect all of them. The timing of this conversation matters too. If Angie's recollection of their conversation around the Billboard Music Awards is correct, then that means Justin's conversation with Lance and Joey seems to have taken place roughly 2 weeks after Justin told her that he wanted her on his solo album. The two events aren't directly connected, but the sequencing showed that it's possible that Justin had spoken about a solo project with someone outside of the group before he ever raised the question with the other members of NSYNC. In Lance's memoir, the language that he remembers Justin using in the hotel room was a lot of hedging. The idea that he might fool around with a solo album, saying that Jive wanted him to try it, and that he didn't know if it would be finished or if it would ever be released. This indirectness is a big contrast to how directly he seems to have spoken with Angie Stone during the same period. The difference in tone doesn't prove anything by itself, but it does highlight the uneven way that information can be communicated inside and outside of a group. But even with those conversations in the background, there was still an overall unified push for NSYNC coming up to the end of the year. By late December, MTV began airing early previews of the music video Girlfriend, and that was the last single of the celebrity era. The public timeline for the group continued forward, but the internal timeline was already starting to shift. The group ended the year promoting a new single, even as discussions that would define 2002 were already underway. Justin Timberlake's 2001 was defined by increasing visibility and creative centrality within NSYNC. He started the year focused on the group's recording schedule and early promotional work, appearing regularly in press tied to the upcoming Pop Odyssey tour. Throughout the spring and summer, Justin remained at the forefront of the group's performances and media presence, appearing in multiple interviews and features that highlighted his role within the group. By the fall, the release of Gone placed him even more prominently in the group's musical output, with the song's arrangement and promotion centering his voice and his performance. He continued to appear in both group and solo press throughout the end of the year, including award shows, televised performances, and year-end features. December closed with the Billboard Music Awards, a holiday special, and the group conversation that preceded NSYNC's extended break in 2002. Overall, Justin's 2001 arc was marked by consistent public visibility, a growing creative presence within the group's work, and the year-long acceleration of his role as NSYNC's primary vocal and promotional focus. So, what can be said about Justin's 2001? Well, I think there are 4 takeaways. I think the first takeaway is that Justin had fewer external projects than most of the group, but his creative visibility inside NSYNC remained the highest. I won't get into all of the ins and outs of the other side projects that most of the rest of the group was doing over the course of the year. I get into those things in each of their biographical episodes. But even as the other members pursued acting, production, business ventures, or even some writing and producing for other groups, Justin continued to be the vocal and narrative center of NSYNC's work. This was something that was largely cemented by the songs that he co-wrote for the Celebrity album, particularly the songs that ended up being chosen as singles. The second takeaway is that Justin's individual visibility expanded throughout 2001 in ways that were distinct from the rest of the group. All 5 members of NSYNC had side projects at different points in the year, but most of those still tied them back to the group, even when they or their projects were the focus of different media pieces. Over the course of the year, Justin started to have solo magazine covers, solo interviews, and solo branding opportunities that increasingly framed him as a standalone figure, despite the fact that his biggest project of the year was technically NSYNC's Celebrity album. The third takeaway is that Gone marked a structurally Justin-forward moment in the group's catalog and created a new level of exposure for him. The song's arrangement, the performances, and the promotional framing centered Justin in a way that had differed from any of the group's earlier singles. When Gone was released internationally, the CD single came out in multiple versions. Most international CD singles for Gone included at least one additional track that Justin co-wrote, whether that was another remix of Gone or a remix of Pop, or even that bonus track, I'll Be Good For You, which, as I mentioned, was a previously unreleased song from No Strings Attached. There was one documented European variant of the Gone single that included The Game Is Over as the bonus track, but the overall pattern still holds. Justin was the only member who consistently received publishing income from that single, and that gave him a unique commercial advantage with that single that none of the rest of NSYNC had at that time. As an additional note, Justin later said that Gone was the first time he had seriously considered going solo, claiming that he originally wrote the song as a duet for himself and Michael Jackson. When I say later, I mean over a decade later. He did not share this story publicly until after Michael Jackson's death, and no one else confirmed it or contradicted it. Because it couldn't be independently verified, it didn't clarify what he was thinking at the time in 2001, but it does show how he later reframed the significance of that song. The last takeaway from this episode is that Justin was the only member for whom external collaborators hinted at a solo future. And in one case, it wasn't just hinting, it seems that there was a direct discussion. Most of the group had worked with actors, writers, producers, business partners, songwriters, basically a wide variety of creatives outside of NSYNC throughout the course of 2001. But based on my research, none of those collaborators made comments suggesting that they were poised for solo careers. In contrast to that, you have Pharrell Williams telling Rolling Stone that Justin would show how soulful he was when it was time for him to do his solo. You also had Wayne Brady endorsing him to TV Guide as the one to watch when this NSYNC thing is over. And then, in December, you have Angie Stone, who later recalled that Justin approached her directly about being on his solo project. Like I said, her interview wasn't published until January, but the conversation she described likely took place during the 2001 calendar year, which would mean that Justin was soliciting features roughly 2 weeks before the private conversation that Lance remembered in his memoir. The conversation when Justin proposed an extended break and announced his intention to make a solo album. No comparable comments or conversations seem to exist for the other 4 members of NSYNC. So that's where we're going to leave Justin Timberlake for 2001. The next episode is our final episode of this season, and it's a look at a retrospective article from ET Canada that offers one possible explanation for what may have sparked NSYNC's breakup. We'll compare that narrative to what 2001 has actually shown us. Until next time, this has been Nicole Raposo. Thanks for joining me, and remember, you can't spell unsynchronized without NSYNC.